Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Hetzer. This is a 28mm or 1/56 scale if you prefer plastic model by Warlord Games. I know that some people get upset when you call the Jagdpanzer 38T a Hetzer, but they're just going to have to deal with it. A machine that hetzers so much is bound to end up being known as a Hetzer. I was pretty excited when I found out that Warlord was doing a Hetzer in plastic, so I had to get one. Those of you who've been around for a while will know how I feel about the metal and resin one. For those who don't know, it's bad. Anyway, the back of the box shows us some variants of the Hetzer, a regular mid-war version, a Flampanzer 38T for those who need to flam some panzer, and the rather interesting 2cm flak version. There's also a series of words about the Hetzer and its use in the war. You can also see in the bottom left images of the included stat cards, decal sheets and damage markers. The box is cool and all, but let's have a look at what's inside. First, the plastic, which is made by Italy, unlike the Marder 3 I built recently, which has a very similar lower hull. This kit comes on 3 sprues and there are quite a lot of parts. Not surprising considering how many variants of the Hetzer that you can build. This is of course a good thing. All of these parts look pretty good to me. They're neatly moulded and, as best I can tell, free from errors. They might still be there hiding, but probably not. There are of course mould lines. They're pretty hard to avoid completely, but they are very minor and will be very easy to remove where necessary. There are so many parts here that I might need to ramble a bit more so that we aren't looking at them in awkward silence. There are also, as usual, decals included in this kit. This is the same sheet that we saw in the Marder 3 box. It even says so at the top. They do look fairly good. In addition to that, you get a stat card for both the flak Hetzer and the regular Hetzer, for all your hetzing information needs. And the damage marker kit that we've seen probably a billion times by now. An assembly and painting guide is also included, unsurprisingly. As with most of Warlord's recent instruction booklets, this one is well laid out and easily understood and followed. The last couple of pages are painting guides which are very basic but not a bad starting point. Let's use that instruction booklet to build us a Hetzer. First, you need to choose which variant of the vehicle you want to build. I've chosen to build a late version regular Hetzer, though it is quite tempting to build the flak version. The first step says to build idler wheels, and the idler wheels are different for each variant. It seems they just couldn't decide how many holes to have in their idler wheels. There is keying to help you line up the holes in the wheels and they go together very easily. The drive sprockets come next and are also keyed so the teeth line up with each other. The fit is a tiny bit tight, but pressure will take care of that and it goes together just fine. Next, road wheels. These will need to be glued onto the suspension parts. There's keying here, but I'm not 100% sure that I've put them on the right way, and the instructions are unusually unclear here. I'm sure this is fine. I try to make sure the wheels are lined up nice and straight, at least in relation with each other. After a while I end up with this fine collection of wheels. They look really good. I bet you've never heard that joke before. Next, we move on to the lower hull sides. I attach the inner part of the final drive. This is made easy by the keying that makes sure you don't put it on backwards. Then I glue on the outer part of the final drive. Again, this is keyed to help with correct positioning, and it's very easy to get it into place. Then comes the return roller. This has a D-shaped keying because the part of it that connects to the hull is angled, and you don't want to put it on facing downwards. That would just look weird. The other hull side goes together pretty much exactly the same way. Now it's time to attach the wheelie bits. First, the drive sprocket. This is keyed and goes into place quite easily, though there is a fair bit of play in the join here, so the keying is a little bit pointless, but it's there anyway. The idler wheel is also keyed. The keying does work a little bit better here. It's nice to have the holes lined up all nice and neat. Then the road wheel assemblies can go on. They sort of lock into the mounting points like so. Make sure that the leaf springs are pointing upwards. Then it's time to install these tiny little shackle things. These were a little bit fiddly to get into place, and it probably would have been a bit easier if they were installed before the idler wheels. What matters is that they're on now. Next, it's time for the tracks. I glue the lower segment on first. The instructions show that the little tab part should be facing towards the front of the vehicle. I apply some pressure to make sure the part stays on, though I don't add glue to the drive sprocket or idler wheel. I've found that leaving them loose makes it easier to install the end parts. I then tried to attach the front section of track, and it doesn't fit. There's keying there, but it's more of a hindrance than anything else. So I trimmed that back and glued the part on, and it ended up looking okay. Not great, but okay. I then add the upper segment. This goes on a little bit easier. I test fit first and it looks okay, so I glue it on. Only at the front first though. Then I glue the return roller and idler wheel too. Finally, I add the rear segment. Like with the front one, I had to trim down the keying parts to get the track to fit. I think the keying here was a bad design choice, mostly because the keying was pretty loose on the wheels, which caused a knock-on effect with the tracks. It's either that or I'm just incompetent. Either are just as likely. At any rate, I got the tracks on and they look okay enough. Moving on, I add the whole side parts to the whole floor. I'm relieved to find that this fits quite easily. There are little tabs down the side of the floor part that link into the hull sides. It's a little bit more fiddly than having a simple bathtub style hull, but it's fine anyway. Then it's time to add the hull rear. If you want to add some spare track links to your Hetzer, you're going to need to drill out some holes here. So that's what I did, because spare track links are nice to have. Then I glue the part into place on the rear of the hull. The lifty things on either side of the hull act as keying to help you get this part neatly into place. Looks like a Hetzer butt to me. I then add the rear mudguardy bits, whatever you'd call them. There's a pair of tabs that lock into corresponding holes on the sides of the hull. I add a bit of glue and some upward pressure where the part joins the hull above the third road wheel, and the part sits nicely in place. It's pretty simple to do on both sides. Then I add the spare track links. The guide pins on the back of these are 2 different sizes, just like the holes we drilled out. This makes sure they go onto the model the right way up. You don't want your spare track links being upside down, do you? I didn't think so. I then add the towing cables. They're not especially sharply detailed, but they'll do. If you don't like the way they look, you could just leave them off. Or you could cover them in mud. There's nothing to guide this really, so I just kind of hung it off the bump on the rear of the hull and added glue. That worked well enough. I guess this is an optional part so they didn't feel the need to add keying. Also, the real thing would probably look a bit different every time the crew put the cables back in place, so I don't think it's a big issue. I then add the whatever this thing is called. There's not really any keying for this part either, it sort of just slides into place against the row of bolty things on the mudguard here. Easy enough. The same goes for this smaller part that goes on the Hetzer's right. That one is a little bit more fiddly owing to its smaller size, but I got it on eventually. I then add the toolbox. It goes on the left mudguard thing like so. Very easy. I add a little bit of glue and let it seep around the edges so that it won't fall off in battle. Next comes the jack, which goes on the right mudguard here. This does go on pretty easily, though it will interfere with the side skirt mounts, so if I had to do this again I would leave this off until later. Next I move on to the upper hull. Before doing anything else, this requires a bit of extra work. If you want to install the spare track links on the engine deck, you'll need to drill out these 2 holes here. Of course the holes need to be a little bit bigger than my drill bit, so I just expand them a bit with my knife. Simple. Then, if you want to add the side skirts, you need to cut out these tabs here. This isn't too hard, but it is a bit of a pain in the arse, and I wish they hadn't done it this way. It resulted in a kind of messy look. I guess it works out great for those making one of these without the skirts, which I guess is the flak version? I don't know, it's just kind of annoying. And then, some more drilling. 2 holes at the front here, which I believe are to mount the jacking block. None of that was very hard to do, and I guess it is a little bit less annoying than having to fill holes you don't want. Moving on, I assemble the main gun. Because I'm a bit of a dunce, I didn't record myself assembling the gun in its holder, but it was pretty basic and I'm sure you can imagine what it looked like going together. I've glued mine together so that it won't move, but you can have the gun elevate and depress if you so choose. I really like that the end of this gun barrel didn't need to be drilled out. Very nice. This gun assembly then slides in through the back of the gun. It's not a mantlet, is it? Casemate? The big gun bump. That's what it is. There's keying in the top of this bump that will lock the gun assembly into place nice and neatly. Then, the gun mantlet can be slid over the barrel and down onto this little nub that it locks onto. I like the way they did this. It removes any doubt as to how far down the barrel the mantlet should be. I apply a bit of pressure, then put that assembly to the side to dry. I then take the roof MG and its shield and glue those parts together. It's easy, though it can be a little bit fiddly to get the gun to sit nice and straight. Got there though. Very gun. I set that aside to dry too. Then it's time for a very tiny little detail. This, I guess it's a periscope? Whatever it's called, it goes into place here, and it has a D-shaped keying to ensure that you can only put it in one way. Then this sliding plate goes over the top of it. The fit isn't quite perfect here, and I had to nudge the periscope part around a little bit after installing the plate. Not really a big deal though. As you can see, I got there in the end. The periscope guard part does seem a little bit big and chunky, but I can see why they wouldn't make it too flimsy. Then I installed the loader's hatch. I think that's who it's for anyway. Probably for the driver too. It's very easy to get both halves of this into place. If you want to model this hatch open, there are different parts for that. Of course, I'm building this one buttoned down. The commander's hatch probably comes next, which I've also got closed. That part goes into place just as easily as the other hatch. There's also a binoculars part that can be mounted here, though you do obviously need to model the hatch open for that. I then glue the main gun into place. This fits into the opening in the front of the hull very easily. There's not much to it. As usual, I'm applying pressure to minimize the gaps, though it wasn't really necessary. The fit was pretty good. Next, the rooftop machine gun can be glued into the mounting hole in front of the loader's hatch. You can have this facing any direction you like. It was remote controlled and could rotate 360 degrees. So I guess they kind of 360 no-scoped with it? Haha, video games. I figured now would be a fine time to glue the upper and lower halves of the model together. This is easy enough, though there are no specific bits of keying to help with this. There's a little bit of a gap at the front, but it doesn't look too bad, and it shouldn't be too hard to correct. The instructions say to do this as the very last step, but I figured it would be better to do it now. Next, I joined the two halves of the exhaust pipe and muffler together. This is simple enough. It is a bit gappy on one side, but it could certainly be worse. There's another exhaust setup for earlier variants of the Hetzer, so do be sure that you're using the right part. Then I applied way too much glue. I blew on it to thin it out a bit and created a weird pattern, though this shouldn't be visible when the model is painted. What I was trying to do was add the long section of spare track links, which as you can see, I did. These are optional, but I think the model looks much better with them in place. Next comes the jacking block, which fits neatly into the two holes I drilled in the front right fender earlier. Simple enough. The convoy light also goes into place easily enough, though it did require a bit of nudging before it looked right. Next I glued this bar thing, whatever it's for, on the right rear near the jack. This would have been easier to put on if the jack wasn't there. Another reason to leave the jack until last. I think I got it into place neatly enough though. After that I installed the exhaust pipe. This is pretty simple, and it looks very exhausty. And finally I installed the side skirts. The one on the right doesn't fit properly because of the jack, so I sliced a little bit off the end of the jack to make it fit. I don't think that will be too noticeable anyway. This was pretty annoying though. I wish they had put a little bit more thought into how these go onto the model. Where they join the hull looks pretty messy. Admittedly, that is partly my fault, but I think they could have very easily made it so these could be attached without having to cut little tabs out of the hull. I mean, Rubicon did it. I did obviously get the skirt on in the end, I just think it could have been better. And in fairness, it was a lot easier to attach the left skirt. There was nothing to interfere with the rear mounting bracket. It still looks a bit messy though. What matters is the plastic Hetzer in 28mm scale by Warlord Games is now complete. And we do have some other Hetzers with which to compare this model. First, the Rubicon Hetzer, which is on the left here in the slightly lighter grey. If you want to see the build video for the Rubicon Hetzer, there's a link in the description and in the upper right of the screen now. I think both of these models look quite good. Both are unmistakably Hetzers and a lot of the same details are present on both models, though there are of course slight variations. The lower front on the Rubicon model looks a lot better than the Warlord one because it doesn't have that gap. The details on the rear are again very similar but different enough. You can see the Rubicon Hetzer has the older style exhaust. The dimensions of both of these models are very close, though the Warlord offering does seem to be a tiny bit smaller, but not in a significant enough way for anybody but the most anal rivet countery types to worry about. And I think they would both look fine hetzing together on the battlefield. The Warlord Hetzer has less tools than the Rubicon one, but maybe we can just claim that the crew was a little bit careless and lost their tools. They'll be in trouble later. I guess there's really only so much variation you can have between Hetzers before one just stops being a Hetzer, so there isn't really a whole lot to say. They're both good models and I'm happy to have both of them, though I think I experienced a little bit more frustration building the Warlord Hetzer. Also, this, because I'm a mature adult, and not at all amused by childish things. While I'm at it, why not compare the metal and resin version from Warlord? I did lose the roof-mounted MG at some point, but I'm not really sure it matters a whole lot. I don't really have anything positive to say about this model. I mean, I don't like to be negative, at least not without reason, but I do think this is a pretty good reason to feel negative. In fact, it made me quite reluctant to buy anything from Warlord for quite a while. It's pretty bad, though it does look vaguely Hetzery. Maybe a Hetzer that has been squashed a little bit or something. The plastic model is clearly leagues ahead of this. I feel like I should mention that not all Warlord resin models are like this. That mouse in the background is also a Warlord metal and resin kit. That said, if there's a choice, I do think their plastic models are the way to go. Okay, so I do rather like this model. I'm fairly happy with how it's turned out. It might need a few gaps filled, but that's not really a big issue, and I've got plenty of experience with that. It does have a few other issues though. Largely, I feel like the track wasn't very well thought out. It was annoying and fiddly to build. I wish it was more like the Marder 3 that I built recently, which is a similar enough design, but the model was much easier to build. I guess the main issue is that the keying on the tracks is very reliant on the keying for the drive sprocket and idler wheel. Those having so much play in them causes the keying for the tracks to be way out. I had no idea that was going to be an issue, so I guess if you're building this kit, keep that in mind and be more careful than I was. Fortunately, I was able to force the tracks to go together by cutting bits out, and they ended up looking okay, though not super amazing. It'll do the job for me. Also, I didn't like the method for attaching the side skirts. It's nothing to scream and shout about, but it does look a bit messy and will also need some filling, or alternatively hiding the mess with stowage or camouflage. That's about the extent of my complaints. The rest of the build was fairly pleasant and easy. It also has the positive of a lot of leftover parts. I'm thinking about using the flak gun in my next post-apocalyptic build, and probably some other bits too. Pretty much all of the parts in this kit looked nice and neat, and the model is going to look nice on the tabletop where you're far enough away to not really notice the messy bits. Also, I think paint is going to help quite a lot. In the end, it's nice to have the choice of another plastic Hetzer on the market. I was really excited when I found out that Warlord were making this, and maybe I hyped it up a bit too much in my head, but it would be a lie if I said I was completely disappointed. I don't want to sound more negative than I really am. I think this model will end up doing quite a lot of hetzing on the gaming table. After all, Hetzers gonna hetz. So, what do you think about this kit? How would you paint it? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, share this video with everyone you know. That would be really helpful. And if you haven't already, why not sub here on YouTube, follow me on social media, or watch me live stream on Twitch. And if you really like what I do, please consider helping to support the channel over on Patreon, or perhaps by purchasing a mug or shirt from my merch store. Links to all of those things are in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon. So until then, be excellent to each other and thanks for watching. Farewell.